Welcome to VowsBurn, home of shocking revenge stories, family betrayals, and secrets that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The discarded child I never asked for much. At 10 years old, I thought my parents' divorce was the worst thing I'd ever endure, but it was only the beginning. My father, Richard Whitman, wanted Ethan, my older brother, to live with him. My mother, Vivian, with her perfectly sculpted hair and diamond earrings, insisted on taking Isabella. And me? I was handed over to a distant aunt in Connecticut, a woman who could barely remember my name and treated me like a guest in a house she barely cared about. The house was grand, yes, but empty in all the ways that mattered. Every morning, I walked through long, echoing hallways, wishing someone would notice I existed. But nobody did. My brother called every weekend, his voice warm and full of life, while I pretended not to feel the sting when my calls went unanswered. My sister barely remembered me, and the few times we met, she looked through me as if I were nothing more than furniture in her mother's carefully curated life. School became my sanctuary, the only place where effort mattered more than bloodlines. I learned quickly that no one would hand me opportunities. I had to take them. I excelled, not for grades or recognition, but for the rare, small moments when someone, anyone, would say, "Good job, Sahar." Those words never came from my family. Every insult, every dismissal, every birthday forgotten became fuel. Fuel I stored carefully, like gold in a vault, knowing one day it would buy me something no one could take away. By 15, I had begun my first secret plans. Tutoring, weekend jobs, every dollar saved, every library book read, every connection made was a piece of my future empire. I swore that if my family had taught me one thing, it was that power was everything. If I couldn't be loved, I would be respected. Or feared. Leaving Connecticut for New York at 18 was my liberation. The skyline intimidated me, but I thrived on it. I found mentors who actually saw me, who valued my intelligence and ambition. Margaret Ellis became my guide, my strategist, the architect of my rise. She taught me that influence and wealth were the true currency, not affection. By 25, I was no longer the forgotten child. Sahar Whitman was a name whispered in boardrooms, a woman of elegance, intellect, and ruthless ambition. I had wealth. I had allies. And most importantly, I had a plan. A plan to make my parents, my brother, and my sister feel the gnawing emptiness I had lived with for 15 years. Then Julian Carter entered my life. A rival at first, his piercing blue eyes and razor-sharp mind both infuriated and intrigued me. I didn't know whether to trust him, whether he would be an obstacle or an ally. But as our paths intertwined, I realized he understood something my family never would. That love could be a weapon, and desire could be armor. Together we would climb, conquer, and make them regret ever thinking they could discard me. New York had a rhythm of its own, one that I had to learn if I wanted to survive and thrive. Every day was a lesson in elegance, poise, and the subtle art of influence. I walked the streets in tailored suits, heels clicking against the marble of financial districts, reminding myself that I belonged here, even if no one had ever believed I would. I learned to smile without showing my teeth, to nod without revealing the storm in my heart. In this city, perception was everything, and I intended to master it. I started small, consulting projects, networking events, and attending charity galas under my own name. Each handshake, each whispered compliment, was a brick in the foundation I was quietly laying. I learned the power of observation, the way people's eyes lingered on status, the way their smiles could conceal venom, and I began to understand what my family never did, that influence could be cultivated, and loyalty could be bought. Julian Carter was impossible to ignore. Our first meeting was at a high-profile investment gala. He had the kind of confidence that made others feel insignificant without trying. He challenged me verbally, questioned my every assumption, and yet, I couldn't help noticing the subtle respect behind his piercing gaze. He was dangerous, but in the way that makes a person irresistible. I had learned early to never let emotion cloud judgment, but Julian made me question that rule. We began meeting under the pretense of business negotiations. each of us assessing the other, testing boundaries, and yet drawing closer with each encounter. He taught me that alliances were forged not just in trust, but in shared ambition. And slowly I began to see him as more than a rival. He became my co-conspirator, my confidant, and the first person who could touch the part of me I had kept buried for years. Meanwhile, whispers of my success started reaching back to my family. A distant cousin mentioned that the Whitmans had heard my name at a charity auction, my contributions recognized and praised publicly. I felt a thrill of satisfaction, knowing they had to be paying attention now, even if they pretended not to care. Every victory I claimed in New York was a silent message. I was no longer the discarded child. The first major test of my strategy came when a prominent investor, who had been loyal to my father's firm for decades, unexpectedly sought a meeting with me. I navigated the negotiation with precision, turning what could have been a simple contract into a multi-million-dollar partnership for my own fledgling company. Julian watched, impressed, but I knew he was also calculating, imagining how we could leverage this success for future moves. That night, as the city lights glittered beneath my apartment window, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I was far from complete. My empire was still in its infancy, and my family remained ignorant of the storm I was quietly building. But for the first time in my life, I felt the thrill of control, the intoxicating rush of power in my own hands. Julian appeared at the doorway unexpectedly, a sly smile on his face, carrying a bottle of vintage champagne. "To beginnings," he said, and I realized that with him by my side, the game of revenge would not just be possible, it would be unstoppable. I raised my glass, letting the city's glow reflect in the crystal. "To beginnings," I echoed, knowing that our story was only starting, and the world and my family would soon learn that Sahar Whitman was no longer invisible. By the time my 26th birthday arrived, I had fully embraced the identity I had painstakingly built in New York. Sahar Whitman was no longer the discarded child. She was a force to be reckoned with. And yet, the thought of my family, of Richard, Vivian, Ethan, and Isabella, lingered like a shadow I intended to turn into a storm. It started subtly. Invitations to charity galas, fundraisers, and elite social events began arriving under my own name. I accepted selectively, always observing, always calculating. I learned who moved in their circles, who whispered about their fortunes, and who hungered for a connection to the Whitman name. Every handshake, every smile was a step closer to reclaiming what they had thought they could dismiss. Julian was relentless in his guidance. "You're too cautious," he told me one evening as we reviewed a list of contacts. "They'll never see you coming if you appear harmless. Charm them, intrigue them, then strike." I smiled, appreciating his insight and the fire it ignited in me. I could trust him more than anyone else, but never completely. In this game, trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. The first real strike came during a spring gala hosted by the Whitmans' longtime social circle. I arrived wearing a custom emerald gown, hair cascading in perfect waves, jewelry understated but expensive, just enough to signal wealth without arrogance. Ethan noticed me immediately, his eyes narrowing with recognition, but he masked it with a smile, the kind that barely concealed panic. I felt a quiet thrill at his reaction. This was the beginning. I approached my mother first, delivering a calculated warmth. "Vivian," I said, voice soft yet commanding, "it's been so long." She glanced at me, feigning surprise, but the tension in her posture betrayed her. My presence was a disruption she hadn't anticipated. We exchanged polite pleasantries, but beneath it I could see the gears turning in her mind. She was analyzing, plotting, perhaps even afraid. Next came Ethan. He tried his usual charm, asking about my life, my work, and my time in the city. I offered just enough detail to pique interest, but withheld anything substantial. He tried to intimidate me subtly, flaunting his connections, his influence, his assumed superiority. I responded with a quiet confidence that unsettled him. For the first time, Ethan had to measure me as an equal, if not a threat. And then there was Isabella, blissfully unaware of the tension her presence alone created. I played the perfect older sister role, warm, approachable, indulgent, but I let her catch glimpses of my sharpness, my sophistication, my capability. She began to realize that I was no longer a child to be ignored or overlooked. By the end of the evening, I had established a presence in their world, quietly demonstrating that I was not just back, I was ascending. Julian watched from across the room, his smile approving, a silent acknowledgement of our shared strategy. Later, as we drove back to my apartment, he reached over and held my hand. "They've noticed you," he said, voice low, teasing but serious. "And they don't like it." I squeezed his hand, feeling a rush of satisfaction and anticipation. They would soon understand the magnitude of what they had done to me, and the power I now wielded. This was only the beginning. Every meeting, every conversation, every calculated glance was a move in a game that my family didn't even know had started. And I intended to win, with Julian at my side, until they understood what it meant to discard the wrong child. By the time summer arrived, I had mapped the Whitmans' empire like a blueprint of their arrogance and entitlement. Every company they owned, every investor who whispered their name, every partner who relied on their brand, I knew it all. And I had a plan to dismantle it piece by piece, quietly, elegantly, without ever revealing the architect behind the inevitable chaos. Julian and I worked late into the night, the city's skyline glowing behind our penthouse windows. He leaned over spreadsheets, running calculations, plotting angles, while I moved across the room, making calls, sending emails, planting ideas. Together, we were a force, two minds merging ambition and strategy. Every step was precise. No move was reckless. Our first target was Ethan's prized acquisition, a luxury real estate development in Manhattan that had been hailed as his crowning achievement. Julian suggested a subtle maneuver, offering alternative investors an opportunity to join my company, an elegant trap masked as collaboration. Within weeks, key investors were shifting their interest away from Ethan's project, enticed by my apparent innocence and professional credibility. I watched from the sidelines as Ethan grew uneasy. His confident swagger began to falter in boardrooms when he sensed competition where he had expected loyalty. Vivian, too, started calling advisors in panic, trying to understand why my name was appearing at every meeting, every proposal, every gala. And Isabella, sweet, naive Isabella, looked to me for guidance at a charity function, asking for advice as if I were the authority she had never recognized. Julian's hand brushed against mine one evening as we reviewed the next move. "They think they can underestimate you," he said softly, "but you're rewriting the rules." I smiled, letting the thrill of control wash over me. Every step was not just professional, it was personal. Every success was a whisper in my family's ears. They had discarded the wrong child. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. Ethan tried to corner me at a gala, his tone artificially casual. "You've made quite a name for yourself," he said, forcing a smile. "I suppose even a forgotten Whitman can rise." I let him think he was taunting me. Then I replied softly, confidently, "Funny, I didn't rise. I simply reclaimed what was mine all along." Vivian's sharp gaze cut across the room at me, a mixture of disbelief and irritation. She had always controlled appearances, believing elegance could cover incompetence. Now she was realizing that elegance alone could not suppress capability, that charm without strategy was hollow. And I was elegance paired with execution. By the end of the night, I had not only secured critical partnerships for my business, but I had also unsettled my family's sense of control. Every word, every glance, every interaction had been calculated to leave them questioning what they had overlooked for so long. Julian's eyes met mine across the room later, and he whispered, "They have no idea what's coming." I nodded, feeling the sweet rush of anticipation. This was only the beginning of my symphony of revenge, and I intended every note to be sharp, deliberate, and unforgettable. By the time autumn settled over New York, I had learned that revenge required patience as much as precision. Every move had to feel natural, inevitable, as if the consequences were the world's doing and not mine. But patience didn't mean hesitation. My family had underestimated me for too long. It was time to escalate. I began with my mother. Vivian Whitman had built her reputation on appearances, on social influence, on the illusion that she could control everything. I invited her to a charity luncheon, ostensibly to consult on my company's philanthropy initiatives. She arrived in designer heels, pearls catching the light, the picture of maternal superiority. I let her savor the illusion of influence, speaking deference when appropriate, and then carefully guided the conversation toward a major real estate project her firm was about to invest in. By the end of lunch, she was unknowingly agreeing to a partnership with my company, thinking it a minor courtesy. In reality, I had secured leverage over one of her key assets before she realized it. Her carefully curated world was beginning to wobble, though she had no idea why. Next came Ethan. He had grown arrogant in his assumed superiority, convinced that my successes were accidental, that I was nothing more than a fleeting competitor. I invited him to a business networking dinner, presenting an opportunity that seemed mutually beneficial. The moment he accepted, I maneuvered my team to present him with an offer so lucrative it would force him to stake his most prized venture. The trap was invisible, elegant, and utterly inescapable. Isabella, still naive to the intricate battles of business and influence, became a pawn of sorts, not a target for harm, but a mirror to show the family what they had ignored for years. She sought my guidance in meetings, treated me as a confidant, and in doing so, reminded everyone present that I had grown into someone they could no longer dismiss. Julian remained at my side through all of this, his presence both reassuring and intoxicating. He understood my vision, never questioning the cold precision of my methods, even when they skirted the line between personal and professional. At times, late into the night, we would sit in the glow of the city skyline, plotting moves, discussing strategy, and occasionally letting the tension between us simmer into moments of closeness that were as thrilling as any boardroom victory. I began to notice the first signs of real unease in my family. Richard was receiving reports about declining investor confidence, projects slipping through his fingers, and partnerships wavering. Vivian sent discreet messages to old advisors, trying to discern the cause, but she had no clue that the child she discarded had grown into a strategist capable of dismantling everything she believed she controlled. Ethan began calling me under the guise of collaboration, masking the panic in his voice with charm. And Isabella, oblivious to the true stakes, looked at me with admiration, unaware that her respect was a weapon in my hands. Every move, every smile, every calculated word reinforced the truth. I was no longer the discarded child. I had returned to reclaim my place in the world, not with tears or pleas, but with power, elegance, and precision. And as Julian's hand brushed against mine one evening, I realized that this dance of revenge and desire was far more intoxicating than I had ever imagined. Winter in New York brought a chill that matched the calculations running through my mind. The city glittered with lights, but beneath the glamour, my plans were moving like clockwork, unstoppable and precise. By now, my family was no longer simply uneasy, they were on edge. Each missed opportunity, each faltering project, each whisper of my name in high society circles was a reminder of what they had lost the day they discarded me. Ethan's empire was the first to show cracks. The real estate projects he had once boasted about were failing, investors were hesitant, and partnerships were stalling. I had orchestrated it so subtly that he could blame market fluctuations, incompetence, even bad luck, but never me. And yet behind closed doors, I knew he was terrified. I could see it in the tightness of his jaw during board meetings, in the way he hesitated when speaking to colleagues who had once deferred to him blindly. Vivian was next. She had prided herself on her flawless social influence, her ability to maintain appearances no matter the cost. I infiltrated her circles, attending galas and philanthropic events she once controlled effortlessly. Slowly, I siphoned her contacts, redirected her influence, and subtly undermined her initiatives. She began questioning herself, her instincts, her competence. It was exquisite to watch the way her confidence began to crumble like a carefully constructed facade. And Isabella. Sweet, unsuspecting Isabella. I never intended her harm, only clarity. I allowed her to witness the disparity between what I had achieved and what my family had overlooked. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and confusion, realizing too late that the sister they had ignored was now untouchable, untamed, and unstoppable. Julian remained my constant anchor, his mind as sharp as mine, his loyalty both a comfort and a thrill. Yet even he tested me in small, deliciously frustrating ways, challenging my decisions, questioning my timing, forcing me to justify not just strategy, but desire. Our connection had become an intricate dance of power and passion, each moment electric, each glance loaded with tension. I wanted him, but I wanted the revenge more. The two were intertwined, impossible to separate. The first confrontation came one frigid evening at the Whitmans' annual winter gala. I arrived in a gown of midnight silk, the kind that made whispers inevitable, my hair styled with effortless elegance. Ethan's smile faltered when our eyes met. He tried to mask it, but the tension was palpable. Vivian, poised and immaculate, studied me as if attempting to dissect my sudden prominence. I let them observe, letting their anxiety bloom silently around them, all while I appeared calm, composed, untouchable. And I could see it, the seeds of doubt, the beginnings of panic. They were starting to understand that the discarded child had returned not for reconciliation, but for reckoning. Julian's hand brushed against mine across the gala floor, a silent promise, and in that touch, I felt the intoxicating power of our combined will. Together, we were unstoppable. By the end of the night, Ethan was rethinking alliances, Vivian second-guessing every move, and Isabella looked at me as though I were something she had never truly understood before. I smiled inwardly. Every step had been intentional. Every victory is meticulously orchestrated. And as we left the gala, Julian whispered in my ear, "Soon they'll see the full picture. Are you ready?" I smiled, cold and sure. "They won't just see it, Julian. They'll feel it. And it will hurt them in ways they never imagined." By spring, the Whitman empire was teetering, and I could feel the final pieces of my plan falling into place. Every calculated move, every subtle manipulation, had led to this moment. The family that had once discarded me was now scrambling to maintain a semblance of control, unaware that the architect of their unraveling stood among them in plain sight. I began with my father. Richard Whitman had always believed that wealth and authority shielded him from consequences. I orchestrated a public unveiling of a partnership he had long bragged about, only to reveal that I controlled the key investors. The boardroom buzzed with confusion, whispers of betrayal spreading like wildfire. His face, usually composed and impenetrable, faltered as the truth sank in. The golden empire he had built on arrogance and favor was crumbling in front of him, and I stood at the epicenter, elegantly unshaken. Vivian, ever the social queen, was next. I arranged a gala under the guise of charity, inviting the city's elite and media. Every move she made was scrutinized, every decision questioned. I had carefully planted evidence of financial mismanagement in projects she personally oversaw. By the end of the evening, her credibility had fractured. She looked at me across the room, her expression a cocktail of disbelief, fury, and helplessness. The mother who had once ignored me was now utterly powerless. Ethan, of course, tried to fight back, but he had been weakened, his confidence eroded by months of subtle sabotage. I cornered him at a high-stakes auction, offering what seemed like a lucrative deal, only to reveal that the property in question had already been transferred under my control. His shock was delicious. For the first time, the golden boy realized he was no longer untouchable. Even Isabella, my sweet, naive sister, began to see the full scope of what had transpired. I did not want to harm her, only to ensure she understood that the sister they had underestimated was no longer to be dismissed. Her admiration, tinged with fear and respect, was a reminder of how far I had come. Julian remained by my side through every step, our connection intensifying. The danger, the thrill, the shared triumph, it bound us in ways I had never imagined. Our late nights planning, the whispered strategies, the stolen moments of desire, everything was heightened by the knowledge that together, we were unstoppable. When the final confrontation came, at a board meeting meant to showcase the Whitman family's dominance, I presented the evidence of mismanagement, fraud, and incompetence. Investors were alarmed, executives murmured, and my family, proud, poised, untouchable, was left in stunned silence. I watched as shock gave way to fear, and fear gave way to understanding. They had misjudged me, underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. I leaned slightly toward Julian, whispering, "They'll never recover from this." His eyes gleamed, full of admiration and desire. I had built this empire, orchestrated this revenge, and yet, the fire between us reminded me that some victories were not just professional, they were personal, intoxicating, and utterly complete. By the end of the day, I had accomplished what I had set out to do. My family was humbled, unsettled, and painfully aware of the consequences of their neglect. And I was untouchable, elegant, and vindicated. But most of all, I was finally free. Free to write the rest of my story on my own terms, with Julian by my side and no one left to stand in my way. The city shimmered beneath us as Julian and I overlooked the skyline from our penthouse, the culmination of years of planning, ambition, and carefully executed revenge. I had arrived at the pinnacle, not by chance, not by inheritance, but by design. Every move I had made, every whispered word, every subtle maneuver had led to this moment. My family had been humbled, their arrogance dismantled, and I stood untouchable. Richard Whitman had retreated to his private office, grappling with the collapse of projects he had once claimed as his own. I had stripped him of authority in the only way he would understand, by proving that the golden boy had no real power when the discarded child returned smarter, stronger, and unafraid. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. My victory was silent, elegant, and devastatingly effective. Vivian Whitman had learned what elegance could not protect her from: truth. Her social standing was intact on the surface, but the cracks beneath were undeniable. Invitations ceased, whispers began, and she understood without words that she had underestimated me for too long. I did not need to forgive. She had already received her punishment. Ethan, the boy who had believed he was invincible, approached me hesitantly one evening, trying to salvage pride with empty apologies. I looked into his eyes and smiled faintly, cold and certain. "You had your chance," I said softly. "You lost it." There was no warmth in my words, only the clarity of justice long delayed. Even Isabella, my sweet sister, had changed. She no longer sought to impress me, but she had learned to respect me, perhaps for the first time recognizing that the sister they had ignored was the one to lead, to succeed, and to command influence. My love for her remained, tempered with the understanding that admiration was the only reward she deserved. Julian stood behind me, strong, unwavering, his hand resting lightly on my back. We had built something extraordinary together, not only our businesses, but our bond, forged in fire, strategy, and desire. Our love was a perfect blend of passion and purpose, each of us challenging and completing the other. It was intoxicating, unbreakable, and real. As we toasted in our penthouse, glasses catching the golden light of the setting sun, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully. The discarded child was no longer discarded. I had transformed pain into power, neglect into influence, and betrayal into triumph. And though my family would never forgive, they would never forget. We stood together, hand in hand, looking out over a city that no longer intimidated me but welcomed me. Julian whispered, "This is just the beginning." I smiled, knowing he was right. We had conquered the past, and the future, ours alone, was limitless. The city lights sparkled below, a mirror to the fire burning within me. I had won, not by chance, not by inheritance, but by design. And the world would remember the name Sahar Whitman, not as a discarded child, but as a woman who reclaimed everything with elegance, ruthlessness, and heart. If you love stories of revenge, family drama, and shocking secrets, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next shocking reveal.